So we've got about kind of 30, 35 minutes. We're going to try and make this as concise as possible. There's quite a lot of us on the panel, so we'll see how far we get. But just to introduce myself, I'm George Strong, the business director at Lively Worldwide. We've got an amazing panel today, quite a variety, from two kind of specialists to two brands and an agency founder. I'm going to kick off, quickly, that everyone just briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll deep dive into the topic, and then hopefully this will be, it will be obviously, a very insightful half an hour. So Emma, would you mind?
Yeah, I'm Emma Mainu. I'm a brand specialist, so I consult for brands. I've worked with brands such as the British government, Audi, Bose, Sony, P&G, and in addition to my professional life, I launched a mental health platform this year called Surviving Sundays.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Keith Jopling. I'm bloody freezing, but I'm also a strategist. Basically, I was at Sony Music, but I just left there, so I'm freelance now. Before that, I was at Spotify in the global team for 2 years, and before that, ran an agency, and before that, something else and something else. But essentially, I'm a strategist.
And Joe?
Cool. Yeah, my name's Joe Martin. I'm the founder of an app called Snatch. Snatch is basically a multi-brand marketing platform where we challenge users to find brand products, and then they have to keep them. Everyone else around them can snatch it from them. So it's effectively like a treasure hunt. I'm not going to say the word Pokemon, but it's the easiest way of looking at it. So we've just launched our beta, last year, and worked with over 150 brands and 1 million users in the UK.
It's a tough act to follow. So I'm Melissa Noakes. I'm an experiential marketeer, and at the moment I am heading up the events and divisional sponsorship at Santander, but I'm also the co-founder of Elevate, which is a UK-wide mentoring programme for the UK events industry.
My name is Michael White. I'm the founder of Lively. We're a experience marketing agency that specialises in physical and digital experiences and work with brands like Spotify, Mazda, NFL and others like that.
Awesome. Sorry, Michael, can you just pass the mic to Joe, please? Thank you. I think perhaps you two might need to share the special microphone. Treatment. Yeah, special.
Right.
Anyway, right.
It's mine working.
Let's crack on. For the talk, it's called Future Focus. This is a insight series that Lively are going to be pushing out next year, Q1, Q2, at South by Southwest, I believe. So kind of stay tuned. But this is the soft launch of Future Focus series. It is all about how and what do we need to know and how to prepare to become future-proof. The topic today we're going to talk about is who are the consumers, who are the customers, who's the competition. So I kind of want to focus on, to start with, the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, said about competition, that it's for them it's not about the startups, it's not about Amazon, HBO, or Comcast. It's actually the local restaurant. It's people deciding to eat out rather than stay in and watch Netflix. And he said it's not really the direct competition that's the competition in itself. It's actually the customers. It's the ever-changing customer taste. It's the ever-higher expectation. So kind of on that note, you've got, if we talk about us, when I say consumers, we're all consumers. So we're pretty savvy these days. We don't like to be sold to. I think we've seen more fake news than real news over the past. We've seen pop culture become more influential than democracy. And kind of we've seen scandal after scandal. So we're kind of lost as to who and what to believe. And it kind of think we struggle with that trust element. So the question is, how do brands get closer to consumers? And how do they start to sell in a more authentic way? So the one thing I'm going to start with, Melissa, is, because we were talking about this the other day, there is a challenge for the incumbents against the challenger brands themselves. The challenger brands seem to have a more direct relationship with consumers. You take Harry's shaver brand, for example. Like, they are smashing it at the moment. And then you've got the incumbents, like the power brands like Gillette, who are having to shave their prices shave their prices. I'm here all day, and they're kind of lost, a huge amount of market share. And you look at, okay, maybe generalizing, but media spend. Gillette will do it very traditionally. They'll look for sponsorship. They'll look for more media, traditional media advertising. Where Harry's will look purely on more digital, social, direct to consumer. So I think it's really interesting to bring you into this conversation. What do you think the challenges are for the incumbents against the challenger brands themselves?
So it's a really good question, because I think I've worked for challenger brands now my entire career. So having been part of a challenger brand, at Sony Mobile, we had 4% global market share. Santander is not one of the big four. I think a lot of it comes down to the mentality and the mindset of a challenger. You go out there, you're risky, you're prepared to change and ebb and flow and take different challenges and look at different things. So I think a lot of it is the mindset of a company and the mindset of the people that work within it. And if I think about some of the things that we did at Sony Mobile, we launched the very first music smartphone. We did a lot of things in that space because we were able to challenge. Santander as well, launching the 123 account, completely changed the marketplace. Nowadays, we think about cashback on our current account as normal, but that all came from Santander and a challenger. And I think a lot of that is because incumbents are very big machines to turn. You have a lot of layers, you have a lot of bureaucracy, you have a lot of systems in place to make things work in a certain way. And there's also a fear. Once you're at the top, the only place that you've got to go is down, so you do protect. So I think it changes the mentality. But I think also customer demand is changing. We're expecting more, we expect things to be on demand, tomorrow, here, now, everywhere. And incumbents, unless you're willing to change, complacency just won't serve you. I mean, look at Nokia, look at Blockbuster, look at Kodak. These were stalwarts on the high street, stalwarts in our minds, and they've disappeared because they weren't ready to take up that challenge. So I think, like I say, a lot of it comes down to culture and mindset.
So on that, just very quickly then, as to how brave, and I think maybe Joe could come into this very quickly as well. You say that, you kind of were a challenger, you're now right at the top, which means that, how brave can you be at the top if the only way, the next direction is down? And that's quite a challenge for, that's the reason that you say, how thick is your line? A challenger brand like Harry's line might be, they can be more expansive, braver, whereas, Gillette maybe, for example, had their line maybe a little bit thinner. They'd have got more to lose in some ways. I don't know if that's the right thing to say or to phrase it, but I think there's an element of, do brands really have to look at how thick their line is? Do they look at that way? Like the impact, the risk analysis.
So I think a lot of it is really taking calculated risks and know what you're doing. We've seen this year the scandals, that have littered the news. And I think a lot more we're expecting brands to behave appropriately and authentically and with credibility and consideration. So, if you've got KFC, whose 600 chicken shops closed and they're fairly irreverent with the way they come back, it builds market share. But then if you've got a brand like BP and what happened in the Gulf of Mexico, they're still trying to rebuild that reputation because of the impact. So I think a lot of it is about thinking about the actions that you take and then how you respond to them if there is a mistake and how you rectify it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And Joe, just before we carry on that, I just want to touch on your development as well. So you were from a forensic science background to a marketeer to a founder of a tech company. That's amazing. I mean, I like forensic science. It's like I watch Dexter. I love it.
That's quite a natural progression, isn't it? I thought.
Yeah, sure.
Not a mass murderer. Just a startup guy.
I think one of the things with it is, obviously a lot of the work that we did on the forensic science side of things was in looking into why people do certain things. So it's looking at the behavioural science side of it, which was kind of my area of expertise. It was then taking that a few steps later, I was taking that into teaching. So I was working with underprivileged kids, and we were using what was relevant to them and interesting to them at that moment in time to actually put a message across and create a a message that stuck. So we were using forensic science and blood spatter analysis to these kids that wanted to know nothing about maths or physics or stuff like that. But by teaching them something obscure that they're actually interested in, they learn everything they needed to know about physics, trajectory, and maths. And it's kind of from that I looked at how that kind of relationship can be taken into marketing, how brands can use that. And instead of forcing something on someone, like making them sit down, making them learn those things, because they're creative people, they're not necessarily like the erudites that want to go through the whole academia and go to university. So by giving them something that actually means something to them, they're still getting that same message, but they're getting it in a stronger way when you liken it to like marketing, sort of pop-up banners and institutionals and stuff like that. So Snatch is progressively from that, and that our whole ethos is about interaction rather than interruption.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, and brands are struggling. I think, I guess one way to say it is, I guess brands are, it's gone from shout and loud and in your face, invasive, to brands now have to earn the right to start a dialogue, to communicate, to get to know you. And if it's not thrown and in your face, and like you're saying, if you're with the game platform that you've, marketing platform that you've created, if that's flipped around and it's the consumer that's the first point of opening, like you open that box, it's the consumer first rather than the brand first. Actually, the dynamic changes and it's a little bit more personal.
Well, but also it should be a two-way conversation as well.
Yeah.
The old way of marketing was tell people about you and try and just tell them what to do, whereas now it's about opening up a two-way conversation, and that's the impact kind of digital's had. And the next generation, people want to learn and want to know, they just don't want to be told. But the trouble is with the bigger businesses, their departmentalization, they don't actually understand how to do that. It's one of the biggest challenges when you're dealing with a big brand, for sure.
Absolutely. And from your experience then, Joe, you obviously set up Snatch a couple of years ago. Was it a couple of years ago-ish?
Yeah, so it was like conceptualized 2014, and then
Right.
obviously I had the whole fun ride of trying to raise money and everything else.
Yeah.
So we launched it to beta last year in February.
And at the moment you've kind of gone into redevelopment stage. You're part invested by Unilever, is that correct? Unilever Ventures.
Yeah, so sort of very early on, and it's a good example of like the bigger companies, the incumbents, looking to get their hands into these kind of products, the technologies, the new challenger brands that can resonate with people of like the millennials or the Gen Z coming through without actually having to completely change the way themselves that they work. But yeah, so we got some early investment from Unilever, like Crunch Fund. We've got Danone, Brent Hoban from Last Minute. So there's even that alone shows that these guys are starting to see that there's a shift in what they need to be doing. And obviously that's great for us because we borrow their credibility and we let them kind of borrow our tone and messaging relationships.
And it's almost like the platform is seen as a trusting platform for consumers. Yeah, they go to it, they know that they can trust. Almost like they trust you guys first as the brand, and any kind of other brand in there, they have a little bit more faith in that experience. Is it more experience led as well?
Yeah, it's definitely experience-led. Like, they know as a user that they're coming to engage with brands. They're seeking out the brands. So we're basically giving both the consumer and the brands a world which they can both play in. So you've got a number of brands who are trying to do like AR experiences, but then it doesn't actually make that much sense to their brand just to come out with it, and that confuses some consumers. So we've had, like, our world is where consumers are feeling safe because we're not going to have any pop-up banners or institutionals. We're letting them seek out brands they want to engage with, knowing that if they engage with that brand, then that brand will make them a customer, get their data, and actually be able to use that data to target them better, but it's controlled by us. So they trust us, and a lot of the brands can use our tone and borrow that trust to engage deeper with the brands, which is why we've seen ridiculous results.
Absolutely, and I guess it's almost a reward as well to engage. You're rewarding someone for also engaging.
Yeah, and I think that's the most simplest form is about a value exchange. So if I, as a consumer, are going to spend time watching your video or being pounded by institutionals all day long. Like, I want something back. And then it kind of lends itself to the way that I then think about that brand.
Yeah.
Because people are smart. Look at Gen Z, millennials. They know how the world works. They know that they're a commodity and that brands will monetize from them. But if you can do that in a way where saying, they know it's going to happen, but here's something for you, not only helps the brand learn about them, but it also means that they're not going down that windy road of mistrust and trying to force people into something which they don't even need or want.
And I think just to take a quick change slightly on the experience note still is, I mean, we were talking about it, Mike, retail in itself, and there's a huge amount element of the transactional relationship to the emotional relationship, and we as consumers crave experiences over information, and the modern sales person is the internet. So, and the digital buying, or the buying process, is largely digital. So what does that mean in your words, that where the future retail is kind of going?
Well, it's
a big question.
Simplify it. Simplify it. My thought process has been the fact that we have all these buzzwords and marketing changing and dynamics and stuff like that, but 10 years ago people said the high street was dead and it was emptying out. But you now look at brands like Lush, who have got 800 stores a couple of years ago globally. You've then got Amazon, did an amazing pop-up experience in Soho Square. You've got Refinery 29 doing incredible things. So the demand, I just think there's a balance between every channel serves a purpose. It's not all about social, all about advertising, all about experiences. The brands that get it right are the ones that get the balance there. And to put our whole point was, I had an experiential agency, which I can't stand that name, but physical events on their own aren't worth the paper they're written on if they aren't part of the marketing mix. So for us, it's about creating experience both physically and digitally, and making kind of content out of them and things like that. Though, we did an ad for, well, not an ad, but we did a business lunch for Twitter that, was for 150 leading female marketeers, but we created and shot a piece of content out of it, and that ended up as an ad slot to the Oscars. So, there's a balance to what you do and a growth to what you do. And that feeling of experience should run through every single channel from as far as we're concerned.
And, when we talk about striking that emotional relationship from a brand to a consumer, and I don't want to keep saying consumer, we're all consumers, so a brand to us, there's storytelling's got to be at the heart of that, right? And, just playing on storytelling in itself, that if the brand have got to be really careful that they don't mix message and tell a story, and it's got to be from across. And what you're saying, I think you're saying, is agencies in one brand have to be very connected and integrated. So all of the messaging from physical, digital, and whatever is on the same path. Yeah, right.
And linked to what your customers want to hear. Again, we have the classic with, especially a lot of the bigger brands come to us. We've worked with some brands over the past that potentially haven't got the brand awareness or the credibility that they want. And you're almost like, do you want to work? Well, actually, Volvo's the perfect example. Look where they were, again, 15 to 10 years ago. Nobody would kind of, they were very good truck sellers of trucks, but then the dynamic within that brand that has changed now, because you've got to the root of what they were as a brand. They fed that through social, they did that through advertising. They've taken over, I shouldn't say Range Rover just around the corner, but they've taken over Range Rover's market in a decade, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, that is.
So, just applying that through simple understanding of what people want to hear now, get behind the brand and start telling the truth and engaging an audience as well. So
I want to stick to that point you just made, understanding what people want to hear. I think this is really relevant for you, Emma. And it's been there's no brands are challenged every day to do good in the world, to have a purpose, and not just within a campaign in itself, but from a foundation. And obviously that kind of has to be with internal and external. In your experience, I mean, actually, I read a stat. I think it was on Forbes. It was that 71% of millennials desire brands to have a more social and environmental drive for change. So even just that stat in itself is amazing. So in your opinion, I know that you work a lot in this space. Some good examples, bad examples. What kind of companies are really doing this well? How are they doing it? And what are the kind of outright challenges that you're seeing and that you're part of helping?
So a few questions there. I think the first thing that I will say is I've come very much from the brand world. I've been both in-house at agencies as a marketeer at senior level and both within agencies as well. And I kind of launched this mental health platform earlier this year, trying to encourage people to talk about their mental health and end the stigma that surrounds it. And quite oddly now, I'm getting invited into brands. I've been in Coca-Cola twice in the past 8 weeks to talk about mental health and how they might drive change. So I see that my two worlds are merging. I think that there should be a responsibility from all of us to do the best that we can in the world. I think that brands fundamentally are driven by people. They are groups of people. And I think the purpose is an inside job initially. I think some of the brands that are doing it really well are looking internally, addressing what they stand for and aligning that with the partners that they might choose to work with. So for instance, you mentioned Harry's. They're one of the best people I can look to at the moment in terms of what they're doing in the world of purpose. So Harry's is a shave brand. It's a subscription, direct-to-consumer brand. And their competitors are Gillette, Cornerstone, $5, is it Dollar Shave Club? And you can lead with product always, but we're all looking for stories to tell. Now, what Harry's have done, there's two founders. They're a New York-based company. They launched at the end of last year here in the UK. And what they stand for as guys, just average guys, is they don't like the way that masculinity is presented. Why do guys have to behave a certain way? They think it puts pressure on guys to not be themselves, and in itself that creates pressure. So they did a modern masculinity survey. They did that in conjunction with the government. And through those findings, they found out that so many men were suffering with their mental health but afraid to talk about it. So they didn't just do the study and badge that and talk about it. The next thing they did was they partnered with Calm, who earlier this year, I don't know if you saw it, Project 84 is one of the most arresting campaigns that I've seen. So Calm knew through their findings that 84 men each week in the UK are taking their own lives. And they wanted to create an installation that would tell that story. But they needed a partner to help them do that. Harry's gave them the money to do that and create an installation that featured the figures of 84 men who'd lost their lives. Harry's stood back and let that happen. They didn't want razors in the foreground of that. They weren't pushing for coverage. My friends do their PR. They weren't tasked to push anything other than the story. Harry's more recently have taken what they learned from that campaign. There's a suicide prevention minister that's now been put within government as a result of that campaign and the campaigning that Calm have been doing. And Harry's recently created the Harry Bot, which was an AI campaign. From the findings that they'd learned in the Modern Masculinity report, they found that more men were happy to talk to an AI bot than they were to their own wives. And through that, and partners, they went through that and shared a lot of the things that were concerning them. And Harry's just continue to go on this journey. They've done campaigns for Pride, both here and in the US. And they fight for the rights of men around the world. And I think that that should be applauded. It's done with integrity and it's authentic. You get brands like Levi's who, throughout Pride, there are a lot of brands. You walk through Soho, you've got Starbucks with a rainbow on the window. They're selling rainbow frappuccinos. I can't tell you what they're doing within their own companies, but I know there's a lot of discussion around Starbucks and their diversity policies. Levi's have championed LGBTQ rights for more than 30 years in their company. In America, when certain companies would only give certain rights to people that were from, who were straight. Levi's gave the same benefits to people that were in same-sex relationships. So I think looking inside as to what you stand for and aligning with those things is the best place to start with something. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think I was just going to mention one thing. I can't remember what it was going to be then. But, I mean, on a whole, do you think that brands are across the board doing this better and but still needing a lot more work internally to get it right? Because, I mean, you take, when we working with Twitter, they were a great example. A brand has a responsibility to push for a change and a cause, and they should do. And they were very strong in their voice internally to push for diversity and equality, and it worked really well, and it was a really great cause, and it was done properly internally. And because basically what I'm getting at is Patagonia were born with a cause, right? And that's authentic from the ground up. A brand that isn't grounded by one thing but wants to push for a cause, it's got to be done right, and it's got to be balanced correctly, because it can be perceived wrong, and like they're just jumping on a cause for the sake of being part of a cause, which could in turn cause a viral disaster rather than viral success in some ways. But also, and I used to mention it with Harry's, it's doing it not needing or wanting the success. It's actually them coming across saying, we just want to make great change. We're not even going to look to sell anything.
Yeah, I think some of the brands that I've mentioned, Harry's now is on its way. It's doing so well. I think I'm talking about, Levi's and certain brands that have a certain market presence. But I think every brand, big or small, can play their part as long as it comes from a place of integrity. You might look to somebody like a brand like Marks and Spencer's that today's had a little bit of controversy. They are a huge employer in the UK. And today their campaign has landed for Christmas, and the Christmas window features women in knickers saying what we want for Christmas are some fancy knickers. The other side of that window is men in suits. In a world where we're trying to talk about equality, it's a shame that a company like that aren't necessarily representing it in their comms. And at Christmas, I might ask, aren't there causes that they could support? A lot of supermarkets choose to do that at Christmas. I think that's a responsibility that they might choose to take as such a huge company. And I also think it doesn't necessarily always need to be cause related. Look at the way, are you producing in a way that is the most sustainable way? Are you offering your consumers the best price? It can cost to be sustainable. It can cost you to be ethical. But companies that are purpose driven and that are ethical are now proving to be 4 times more profitable, and people are choosing to invest more in companies. Of course, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So, conscious of the time, Keith, hello, hey. Joe, so can you give the mic to Keith? Thank you. Data. Oh no. Hello. So, I think I was thinking about this today and how to phrase this. Data's a minefield. It's constantly being talked about as a huge topic at Cannes Lions this year, and it constantly is within everything that we do, agency and brand, but also in our personal life. So I wrote this the other day, and I think it helped me process it. We crave relevancy from brands, correct? But getting relevancy means understanding us as a consumer personally, which means creating or understanding data, which then, if you get data, invades our privacy, which is what we don't want. So how do we get around that minefield of, yes, we want to be served something relevant to us, but we also don't want the brand to know who we are? I know it's a question that is very difficult to answer, but like, how do brands use how do we become more mindful?
Yeah, I mean, you do it right and definitely see it first and foremost. A lot of what Emma's just said about authenticity and investment and respect, you've got to take that to the data as well. So there's a huge journey to go on. So just to broaden it for a minute to the theme that we've been talking about, you've got incumbent companies that have been around for a long time have a certain approach to doing everything, right? And it's pushing, it's selling, it's in terms of data, probably second, third generation CRM. But now you've got, it's a really interesting space that we're in now, because the challenger brands are actually growing up to the point where they're
no longer challenger
they're
brands.
the incumbents to a certain extent. So Spotify, Amazon, Netflix, they're the market leaders. They started out with a completely different attitude towards data.
And is that just going back on how thick their line is becoming narrower, or like just because the older they get, the narrower the line?
There's a few things. First of all, they've invested in the whole process of having data, which is a massive journey to go on. Spotify's got 200 data analysts beavering away on data. It's got 3 or 4 huge data lakes. It's made us. Its investment is hundreds of millions, right? For essentially what was a startup, more than just less than 5 years ago. Incumbents are catching up. I mean, Sky is invested massively in data, for example. The banks are investing massively in data. There's a fair few things you could just use as pillars. First of all, you play by the rules. You take privacy really seriously, but it's actually what you do with the data. So, in the case of Spotify, they're doing a couple of things with it, which means we're okay with it as consumers. They're helping us discover more music. So the whole purpose of using the data is to help us with discovery of the product.
And it really does work.
And it works. So, Discover Weekly and so on has been a big breakthroughs using data. So make progress with it and customers will understand it. The other thing is just be transparent also, just be relevant and surprise and delight people. So CRM it's changed completely. So again, not to blow Spotify's trumpet too much, because they have made their own mistakes and they've learned a lot. This idea of wraps, so coming up to Christmas, the CRM just tells you what you've listened to, who your favorite bands are, who you listen to most, who you might discover next, and it's just genuinely really great CRM. And if we get great CRM, we don't mind that. We understand that they've used the data. It's a trade-off. So you don't cross some lines, but you've got a lot more capital if you've built data from the start with a certain attitude in mind, which is responsibility, trust, abundance, investment.
So we actually were briefly talking about this a couple of days ago, and just the power of data, power of a company with a large database, very direct to consumer, could sell anything. I mean, obviously you'd think Amazon, fine, but just take Spotify as an example, hypothetically. If they were to sell cars, they would probably have the dealerships worried, because they're closer to consumers, right? They are direct.
Possibly, yeah. So I mean, Mike was talking about the high street and retail. So traditional retailers are worried not about other traditional or new retailers, they're worried about the platforms. And there's a lot to that. Obviously, there's reach and an audience and a customer relationship. And there is ownership of a certain market. So, what Netflix and Spotify have that, most car makers don't have is a really deep relationship with millennials. Sorry to use that ridiculous marketing term for a billion people, but they do. So if Volvo wanted to reach a millennial audience, maybe they could just invest their 10 million media budget into Spotify and see what happens.
And Spotify give them each individual person a personalized playlist for their test drive.
Right, yeah. So we get great playlists, and the car turns up outside our door. We've got it, But you don't want to go to a showroom and go through all that BS.
Well, you don't, but maybe you do if that showroom experience changes, because it's too selly. The dealerships, you go in there and you think, I'm just going to be sold something. But if you go there to have an experience, maybe it's different.
Is selly a Donald Trumpism? Did you just use that? No, that's Bigley, isn't it? Yeah, no, you've got, this is where, you know, as an incumbent business, you've got to learn the good habits that are now in the market that you've got from, like, being on time.
We're being flashed
being on time.
here. Cool. Michael, just give me 1 second. Just gonna do one quick wrap up. Each individual person, Mike, I'll start with you. Sorry. Just a takeaway. What do you think, you know, we should be aware of, conscious of, you know, what do brands need to do? What do agencies need to think like? And let's not forget, we are all consumers and we're marketing to our own selves.
So yeah, no pressure. Thanks, George.
No worries.
Well, to be honest, a very simple thing is to keep it balanced. I think the trouble with us marketeers is we like fads and trends, and we latch onto, oh, it's all about digital, it's all about social. I think we've learned a lot, or I've learned a lot just from hearing people here talk about having some integrity, having, you know, understanding your audience more. I think that Marks and Spencer's analogy is brilliant, because, you know, they're not listening and they're not watching what's happening in the world, and they could really stand out so much more.
So one word?
Listen to your audience.
Oh, lovely.
Sorry, listen.
Well, you know what I mean.
Listen.
1, 2, 3 words. Melissa, just a word or 2 words?
Sorry, I talk too much.
A word.
I can come back
I'd
to
say based on the listen, I'd go connect as well, like connect with your audience.
Yeah, lovely. Joe?
Well, they're taking my words. So.
You can say the same. You can say the same.
I think into actually a lot what Emma was talking about, with like CSR and the social responsibility, but getting it right. So it's about relevancy.
Relevancy.
Across the board.
Relevancy. I'll take relevancy.
And if you do focus on relevancy with your customers, you don't have to worry about your competition.
Ooh, I like that.
The cringe factor. If you've got integrity, it shouldn't make you cringe. It should feel real. That's basically it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michael. I think our time is up.